We want to, Lord willing, conclude a series of lessons that we've been discussing about the church that Jesus built. I suppose we could go on and on and on because there's a lot of things to talk about concerning the church. But we're going to try to wrap it up tonight and start something new next week. And I'll give you a little heads up about that at the end of the lesson tonight. So we're talking about the church that Jesus built. And we spent times talking about just the nature of the church universal, the church in the local congregational sense. We spent a lot of time talking about how to establish authority, because that's so critically important. How is the church supposed to function? We won't know if we can't go back to the Bible and establish authority. So we talked about authority. We talked about how the church should be organized according to the New Testament pattern. Very important, because that arrangement, that scriptural arrangement for organization at the local church level and no higher, that's not being observed in the religious world. We talked about the organization we talked about the worship of the church. And then last week we talked about, we spent all our time last week talking about the worship of the church. And tonight we want to talk about the work of the church, the work that the Lord has assigned the church to do. So we want to talk about what the work is, and I don't think we have a whole lot of disagreement about that. We want to talk about how that work is supposed to be done, which is a major area of contention among churches of Christ. We'll try to explain that as we go along. So the work of the church, as the New Testament defines it, is, first of all, edification for the saints. That is, to edify is to build up or to strengthen. And the church certainly is organized in such a fashion to accomplish that. Clearly in the things that the Lord put into the church, we see that this was a function it was intended to fulfill. Notice in Ephesians 4, beginning verse 11, He gave some apostles and some prophets and some evangelists and some pastors and teachers for the perfecting of the saints, for the work of the ministry, for the edifying of the body of Christ, from whom the whole body fitly joined together and compacted by that which every joint supplieth, according to the effectual working in the measure of every part, maketh increase of the body into the edifying of itself in love. Notice all these various offices and roles that were in the church, both in the early church and then in the ongoing organization of the church, were intended for the edifying of the body of Christ. The church was to function in such a way as to edify itself. And so that is definitely a part of what God intends the church to do. Let me ask you this question. What would be the methodologies of accomplishing that work? If the church is intended to edify, build up, and strengthen its own existing members, how would we do that? Anybody? Okay, through the study of the Word? Yeah. Dawn? That's right. I think Dawn makes a really important point there. Did you notice in that verse that this is all a spiritual focus, right? One of the things that is not included there is, our young people, we're worried about losing our young people, and that's a legitimate worry. We need a softball team to enter in one of the local rec leagues, because that builds kids up. Well, that's not, now it may be, it's fun to get together and play ball. Nobody's denying that. But there's no authority for the church to be involved in providing for recreation under the premise that a kid could play softball every day, all summer long. And if that's all there was to it, he wouldn't be one whit stronger spiritually at the end of the summer than he was at the start. Right? That's not how you build people up spiritually. And so this is a spiritual focus. This edification that the Lord has authorized the church to be engaged in is to make people stronger spiritually, right? And so we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But this edification is directly linked to what the shepherds or the elders or the bishops, the pastors are supposed to do. They're supposed to feed the flock. If you had a flock of sheep, how do you grow them? How do they get bigger and stronger? Well, you make sure that they have the nourishment that they need, right? And so that's what nourishes the body of Christ as well. The sheep in the fold are to be fed the Word of God. And so all this is a spiritual focus. Wait.
So Colossians 3:17 says, "Let the word of Christ richly dwell in you with all wisdom and teaching, and admonishing one another with psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, singing with thankfulness in your hearts to God." So I think part of this, the edification, may be mentioned here in Colossians 3, where he's talking about admonishing yourselves with songs and hymns.
Well, all of worship actually is that, right? One of the we often mention is one of our goals in coming together in worship is to glorify God and edify one another. And so really singing definitely, but really all of worship is intended to strengthen us, build us up spiritually. And so it's definitely a spiritual focus. It's not a carnal, physical, worldly focus. The work of the church is to edify or build up the saints.
Great.
Yes?
Does the Bible call edification a work?
Uh,
It's like a natural byproduct of the things we do, like coming together and singing and worshiping together.
Well,
It says work of the ministry right before it.
oh, back here in...
12.
So it talks about the work of the ministry right here. I don't know. I've never really thought about it from the aspect I think that you're asking, Eric. The work or the goal or the function. I don't know. Maybe we could use different terminology there. But the assigned duty of the church is to strengthen its members. Does any of those kind of terminologies help?
I don't consider it a work or a duty. I think it happens through the other things we do.
Well, for instance, I'll give you a for instance. We've got all the kids and teachers have headed off to their Bible classes tonight. What's the authority for that? This is something the church is supposed to be doing, teaching and admonishing, strengthening and encouraging. That's all into this terminology of edification. And so having Bible classes. So I tell you, I've read my New Testament through a few times, and I don't think I've ever seen the word Wednesday in the New Testament. So where's the authority for us to have this assembly on Wednesday? Well, I would argue that it's authorized under the assigned duty or work of the church to build up, strengthen its members. Wait.
I guess I would probably argue if there is a byproduct of what we're doing, then that automatically assumes that we're supposed to be doing something. And so we have to know what we're supposed to be doing, what the church is responsible to do. And I think, just like you said, I mean, God, I think He's laying it out, what the church is supposed to be held accountable for doing. But
I think Eric is just maybe uncomfortable with the terminology a work, that edification is a work. He's saying it's an outcome. We work to that outcome, maybe. In other words, the church is to engage, to act, to function with this outcome as the goal. Maybe that is the way you would say it along the lines of your thinking. Okay? Tom?
Go back a little bit there. He gave some apostles and some prophets and some evangelists and some pastors and teachers. And stop there and, okay, why did he give those? Well, he goes through and gives several different situations for them, like the work of ministry, what encompasses in that ministry. It's like duties that they are assigned to do. Why do we have elders?
Well, he said, we know we still benefit of the work of the apostles, although there are any apostles. We still benefit of the work of the prophets, although there are any prophets today. But we still have evangelists, we have pastors, we have teachers for the perfecting of the saints. In other words, to mature or bring to full growth Christians. That's why God designed the church that way, is so that Christians would grow and mature, be built up, be edified. And so that's the outcome we're seeking by the things that we're assigned to do. Okay? So maybe that, Eric, maybe that's a way we could say it, that the work or the goal of the things the church is assigned to do is, one, edification. Secondly, the church is assigned a work in benevolence. Benevolence is not a word we hear very often in the general conversational usage, but I think we all understand the idea. Benevolence is physical assistance, providing things needed in the physical world, the physical body. Now, one of the points of contention that has existed for decades is the question of who can be the recipient of the benevolent work of the church. And we want to emphasize, and this has caused division, but in the New Testament, we only see the church authorized to provide for the needs of saints or Christians. A lot of people think that's a hard-hearted statement. It's not intended to be, because we as individuals are given the duty to be benevolent to any and all. And as individual Christians, let us do good unto all men as we have opportunity, especially those of the household of faith, Galatians 6, verse 10. That passage is addressed to us as individuals. But in regards to the church acting as a collective body, the only authority we have in the New Testament is for the church's collective funds to be used for the relief of needy saints. Now, the Lord never went in any detail explaining why that He thus limited the church, but I think from a practical standpoint, we can see His wisdom in the matter. In a practical standpoint, if the church was to try to supply the needs of everybody worldwide, you know how long it would take to expend the total resources of the church if the church was assigned the job of relieving all physical needs worldwide? You could do it in a moment. In the blink of an eye, all of the resources of the church would be expended, and it wouldn't make a dent in world poverty or need. God didn't assign that. If God had assigned that work to us, He surely would have assigned us an ability to address it better than we can. We can't address that need. We can't address worldwide hunger. We can't address worldwide poverty. But the Lord didn't give the church that job. The Lord gave the church a limited role in benevolence, and that is in regards to needy saints. And in the New Testament, again, this has been a point of contention. It was 50 years ago. This was a hotly debated topic. Public debates were held on this topic all across the country, because some brethren wanted the church to use money to support non-saints, people who were not Christians. Now, again, I think we want to emphasize that as individual Christians, we can and we should be benevolently minded toward any and everybody who has a legitimate need. But as a collective body, the local church is only authorized to expend its resources for needy saints. In Acts, again, this point has been argued and debated for decades, but here's one passage that I would use that shows us this. In Acts 11, beginning verse 27, in these days came prophets from Jerusalem unto Antioch, and there stood up one of them named Agabus, and signified by the Spirit that there should be a great dearth throughout all the world, which came to pass in the days of Claudius Caesar. Then the disciples, every man according to his ability, determined to send relief to the brethren which dwelt in Judea, which also they did, and sent it to the elders by the hands of Barnabas and Saul. Notice, this assistance was sent to the brethren. It was, in fact, delivered specifically to the elders. You think, so this was a worldwide famine. Apparently, Jerusalem and Judea were hard hit in this. In a case like that, do you think Christians in Judea would be the only ones suffering? Obviously not, right? A general famine would be affecting the whole population. But who did they send their relief to? Specifically to the brethren, and delivered it to the hands of the elders for distribution. And so, again, there are plenty of other ways to argue this case, but I think it's important for us when we talk about benevolence to really stress that this is a limited work. It's not a broad general work of the church to do benevolence. It's a limited work of the church. Gordon?
Restrictions there also, Greg, about widows and need and so forth that we have to follow.
Yeah. There's even to the point, if a man won't work, neither should he eat. There's other considerations that would factor into the administration of this benevolence. But always and in every case, without exception, the only examples we see of the collective body of a local congregation expending its funds or resources was for the relief of needy saints. I cannot overstress, though, the fact that does not relieve the rest us as individuals. I mean, as individual Christians, it's a wide open thing. We can and should help everybody we can. But the Lord has limited the church in this matter. And I think in His wisdom, we see that He understood this allows the church to function in the far more important spiritual realms of edification. And the next one we'll talk about is evangelism. Wade?
Yeah, I was going to say, Matthew chapter 26, and verse 11, Jesus says, for you always have the poor with you. So basically what he's saying there is, I was kind of going back to the point that you made a while ago, is that the poor is never going to go away.
That's an unsolvable problem.
It's an unsolvable problem. But I think the Lord in His wisdom realized that the people in His churches, He wants to make sure that the church grows on and on and on. And so He's got to be able to solve those problems that come up.
If He wanted us to be able to address world hunger, the one who fed thousands with a handful of fish and loaves of bread could have equipped us to do that work if He wanted us to do it, but He didn't equip us to do that work. That's not our job. That's not our work. And again, I don't want that to sound like a hard-hearted observation. It's just what we read in the pages of our New Testament. Again, we've got to go back to that authority matter, right? And then the third area that the Lord wants the church to work, this is the one I don't think we have nobody argues about this. This is obvious. A third work or goal or intended outcome of the things the church does is to evangelize, to proclaim the gospel. In 2 Corinthians 11, and all of these things, we could go on and on. We could talk about lots of additional verses. But in all of these things, we see a pattern, a clear pattern in the New Testament. Here's one verse that I will use to argue that the church has this responsibility. Paul said, I robbed other churches, taking wages of them to do you service. And when I was present with you and wanted, I was chargeable to no man, for that which was lacking to me, the brethren which came from Macedonia supplied. And in all things I've kept myself from being burdensome unto you, and so will I keep myself. Paul talked about when he was in Corinth and he was preaching. He said, I didn't take anything from you, because he knew that church at Corinth had all kinds of problems. But notice, he said, I robbed other churches, taking wages of them to do service here in Corinth. And so clearly this would stand as apostolic example for churches to pay wages to those who are preaching the gospel, right? Plenty of other verses that we could go to emphasize that point, but I think this establishes the case. So again, I don't think we have any argument about the church should be preaching the gospel. We do have some disagreement among churches of Christ about this limited benevolence to needy saints only. We have some issue on the edification question because people want to try to incorporate things under that heading that don't fit, right? We love to get together and have meals. Our sisters in the church are some of the best cooks in the world, And when we have a potluck supper or dinner or pitch-in or something, I'm telling you, the eating is fine. But that's not the work of the church, right? And that's why we always are careful to keep that in the realm of what we do together as individuals versus what the church does. That's why we don't have a fellowship hall. That's why when we have such gatherings, we have to do it in our own homes or go to some other facility to accommodate that, because we don't think the church has any authority building a fellowship hall or a gym or a kitchen, because that's not the work of the church. That's not the authorized work of the church. So again, some of these things have caused a lot of trouble. There's been especially a lot of question about the needy saints issue. We can talk more about that if we need to, but again, we're going back to what's authorized for the church as we read about it in the New Testament. Now, we got just a little while left. I want to try to wrap this up, but let's talk about some innovations. In regards to these three things, some innovations that men have worked into the church, things that men have changed, try to approach it in a different way. One of the things that men have done is what we generally refer to as institutionalism. And when we talk about that, what we mean is the establishment of human organizations to do some or all aspects of the work of the church. This goes way back, and we've talked about this before. So men in their mind have imagined, we need to come up with a bigger, grander scheme. We need a bigger plan to try and get these jobs done. For instance, evangelism. There are billions of lost people in the world. And we need a really strong organization to get that message out there. The work is so big, no one local church can accomplish it. Therefore, we need to build an organization that can get the job done. Now, this kind of thinking goes way back. Alexander Campbell was into that. A lot of people call us Campbellites, think that we are just blind followers of Alexander Campbell. We're not. And Alexander Campbell was specifically wrong on this. Alexander Campbell was the first president of the American Christian Missionary Society. And so Alexander Campbell himself got drawn into this idea. We need a bigger organization. And so they established a man-made organization. Alexander Campbell was the president of it. There was a board of directors. And they solicited churches and individuals to send money to this man-made organization. And then that organization would oversee and determine how the money was spent, sending preachers and materials and whatever worldwide. That's still going on. That was a very divisive thing. We talk about how the churches of Christ and the Christian churches split back around 1900. And very often we say that what caused the split between churches of Christ and Christian churches was instrumental music. That actually was a secondary issue, although it was an issue. The main issue was this: institutionalism, building human institutions or organizations to do the work that God has assigned the church to do. And that was the big driving force between the division between Christian churches and Church of Christ. Unfortunately, some of our brethren have resorted to this same kind of methodology, and I don't think they even know they're doing it. Through the years, I got a great big folder in my office. Every time I get a mailer which describes one of these perversions, I stick it away and save it, just to illustrate what we're talking about here. So here is a worldwide organization under a board of directors. It's called the World Bible Translation Center. Okay? And the letter starts out, what if the Church of Christ could place 1 million copies of God's holy word in the hands of people who would do almost anything to get one? It's a dream, but if congregations of the Lord's church will join hands, we can make this the biggest year for printing and distributing Bibles in the history of our brotherhood. And so they're asking the churches to send money to this organization. This letter is from the president of the organization, Dale Randolph. And then they even provided a card how much you want to send. but you send it to, not to individuals, not to preachers, not even to other churches. You send it to the World Bible Translation Center. And so that's an example of the fact that people are still using this kind of an approach, this institutional approach, to try to get the job done that God actually assigned to churches to do. Wade?
Yeah, I just want to make mention that David Lipscomb actually started the Gospel Advocate.
The man David Lipscomb.
The man David Lipscomb and a partner started the Gospel Advocate just in defense of the mission, or not defense of the missionaries, to combat the missionary society.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons that there was such a big split, was because of the Gospel Advocate and because of all that they preached against it.
Yeah. The missionary society was really a big divisive issue about 100 years ago. The two bodies, the Christian churches and Church of Christ, are now so far apart on all kinds of issues. But that was an initial big bone of contention and division. So an institution, so when you think of institutionalism, think of an institution. And the use of an institution, something that man instituted, something that men organized to try and do the work that God has assigned the church to do. We talked about, the limitations that God placed upon the organizations. They're the only functioning working unit in the church that we read about in the New Testament is the local congregation. And there are reasons for that. And we talked about some of the reasons why it would be a mistake, and always is a mistake, when men try to go to something bigger than the work that a local congregation can do. So someone says, well, here we are at College View. We have limited resources. We can only do so much. Well, we can only do what we can do, and that's all that God expects us to do. God does not expect us to do anything bigger than we're capable of doing. We don't have to invent things that He never authorized to do a bigger work than He assigned us. We're assigned to do as much as we can do, and that's all He holds us accountable for, okay? I think that's an important consideration. All right, now, so these institutions like the World Bible Translation Center I was just reading to you from, or a missionary society like the American Christian Missionary Society that Alexander Campbell was the president of. A lot of brethren, and there was a lot of people who had to stand up and explain these things, like David Lipscomb did in the Gospel Advocate, and other men too in that same era, were strongly opposing these human institutions. These missionary societies and these other organizations of men were being opposed. But the inclination to organize at a higher level was not gone. And so some people could say, well, I see it would be wrong for the church to support an institution with a board of directors and a president. I think it'd be wrong for the church to do that. But what about this? What if instead of assigning this work to some human organization over here, what if we assigned it to a church and the elders of a certain church, and men dreamed up what we have identified as the sponsoring church? Now, the sponsoring church, some people thought they had found the solution, because this would allow organization at a level higher than a local church, but it'd still be under an eldership. It wouldn't be an institution that men invented. There wouldn't be a president and board of directors. There'd be elders of a local church that would be overseeing something. Let me give you some examples of the kind of things that this just illustrates what they do. Here's some information from the Christian Student Center in Knoxville. The Christian Student Center reflects the concern of Churches of Christ for students at the University of Tennessee in Knoxville. It is part of a vital campus ministry for Christ, which is sponsored by the Laurel Church of Christ under the oversight of the elders of this local congregation. And in this letter, they say, we are calling upon congregations across the state of Tennessee to respond to this urgent need. So here's the elders of a church. This probably is the most liberal church in Knoxville. We dealt with those folks when we were in Knoxville. It's a church near downtown, not far off of the UT campus. They have a student center. They can't afford it. First of all, it's not authorized. I mean, because it's there to provide recreational escape for the students. They do some Bible studying there, I'm sure. But regardless of whether the activity itself is authorized or not, this Laurel Church can't do it. So they're putting out an urgent appeal for other churches to send money to them so that they can operate this Christian student center, and it's under the oversight. Who oversees that? The elders of that local church. What are they overseeing? They are obviously overseeing a work bigger than their own congregational work by their own admission. They can't afford it, and other churches are going to have to contribute to make it possible. They're overseeing something bigger than their own local work. Do you see that? Several years ago, it was called Project USA Today. And there was, I don't even know if they still publish the USA Today or not. That newspaper used to be a big deal all over the country. You could pick up copies of the USA Today. And there was a big goal to get ads about Churches of Christ in USA Today. They estimated that they were going to spend $208,000 the first year to put advertisements in USA Today. And this was a work of, here again, this is in their own literature. No single congregation could support this effort on its own, nor should it. The Maple Hill Church of Christ in Lebanon, Tennessee is sponsoring this effort. And so churches were being encouraged to send money to this church in Lebanon, Tennessee, and the elders of that church in Lebanon, Tennessee then would oversee this nationwide work, admittedly bigger than they were able to do on their own. Those elders were undertaking a job bigger than the work of that local congregation. I'll go real quickly here. Here's one from real close nearby, Lewisburg, Tennessee. The 5th annual Marshall County Tent Meeting is an effort by Churches of Christ throughout Marshall County under the oversight of the Church Street Church of Christ in Lewisburg. Right? So there was an effort to put on an annual tent meeting in Marshall County. The Church Street, and some of you will know that church, that's a big congregation right in Lewisburg. But they're undertaking a county-wide effort overseeing not just the work of that local congregation, but all the Churches of Christ in Marshall County. And they're asking them to contribute to that. Here's one, Memphis School of Preaching. The Memphis School of Preaching is a work of the Knight Arnold Church of Christ and is under the oversight of the elders of the Knight Arnold Church of Christ. However, the magnitude of the work is such that no one congregation has the finances to carry on this great work alone. Although Knight Arnold puts more than $300,000 per year into the operation of the school, it simply does not have the financial ability to carry the load of the school alone. Therefore, other faithful congregations and individuals assist in this work in a financial way, and for their help we are most grateful. I'm not adding anything to that. That's their own statement, right? They are not able to do this work alone. And so they're getting other churches to send money so that, notice, this is under the oversight of those elders, but other churches are sending them money in order to carry on a work big by their own admission, bigger than they're able to accomplish. That is a sponsoring church, okay? That's what we're talking about when we talk about the sponsoring church arrangement. There's more examples, but we're going to run out of time here. So, from our studies in these recent weeks, what's wrong with that? What's wrong with that? Anybody? Wade?
Well, I think it was in Acts 20, it says that he said to shepherd the church among you. So the elders are responsible for their own work. They shepherd. They're not responsible for other churches. They're only responsible for the work that is among them.
That's exactly right. I think the verse that you really have reference to is 1 Peter 5 here. The elders which are among you, I exhort whom an elder, who also an elder and a witness of the sufferings of Christ, also a partaker of the glory shall be revealed. Feed the flock of God which is among you, taking the oversight thereof. Of what? Of that flock, right? So the oversight of elders is limited to the local congregation. And therefore, the elders of a sponsoring church, when they ask other churches to contribute to them so they can oversee this bigger work, they are assuming the oversight of something bigger than they're authorized to oversee. Is that clear? You see what's wrong with that? Now again, this has been a real hot, contentious issue among churches of Christ. That's why churches of Christ are divided. That's why some churches of Christ don't have anything to do with other churches of Christ. This would be why that the label anti has been attached. For instance, many people would refer to College View as an anti-church. Well, it's because we're against some of the things they're doing. It's meant to be a prejudicial terminology, but that's why we're against what they're doing, because we don't think it's authorized. We think that they're doing things that are not scripturally allowed. Actually, and usually people just, their eyes roll back in their head when you try to make this point. That sponsoring church thing, do you see any similarity between that and when we talked about how the churches were organized? You know, suddenly there was one eldership that was over all in a region, then one elder over all those. He became the area-wide bishop and then kept evolving all the way to the Pope in Rome. This is the first step in that process. Now, people usually don't want to admit that. But once you get the church functioning at a level bigger than what the local church can do, you've made your first step in the direction of that kind of an apostasy. Eric.
Can we go back to that other slide? I'm with you on the sponsorship. I'm stuck on the institutional one. If that missionary society was entirely separate from the church, and it would be appropriate or authorized for churches to send money, but could individuals? I wouldn't see anything wrong with individuals.
That's a whole other question, and what Eric's asking about, and that's also been sort of a contentious issue. We can talk more about that. It's a little more of a refined argument. You're talking about what's sometimes referred to as an individually supported missionary society or an individually supported human institution. I'll just say this, and we can talk more about this later, but my understanding is that the only authorized, overseen collective that the Lord ever authorized was the local congregation. Now there's a difference. Here, let me explain this difference. So, what if I say to you, hey Eric, let's print up some flyers and let's go down here to this neighborhood down. Let's go door knocking down there. You know, I'll put in $10, you put in $10, and we'll go knock on doors and try to set up Bible studies with people. Could we do that? Sure. Here's where it would cross the line in my understanding. What if you and I organized the Neighborhood Door Knocking Association, and we solicited money from other Christians to give to us to be the overseers of this money, to decide how and where and when this money will be used and spent? That is not biblical, because that establishes a collectivity of Christians, not a local congregation, but a collectivity of Christians, an overseen collectivity of Christians, and the only overseen collectivity of Christians that the New Testament authorizes, the local congregation. We can talk more about that. I can see it. Okay. All right. Clayton.
Just going to clarify, are you talking specifically for like preaching and teaching, evangelism, or any type of work?
Any type of work. If we set up a human organization to do it, then we've stepped outside the authority of Scripture. There's actually sort of an implication there. If we think we have to set up an institution to do a work that God assigned the church to do, we're basically saying we don't think the church is capable of doing what God said it should do. We think we're going to have to help by setting up an institution. And any of the work that the church is supposed to do.
Just to clarify, like a food bank. It has nothing to do with church or religion or anything like that.
We can set up, because we're authorized as individuals to be benevolent.
But you're not saying like the Second Harvest Food Bank, if I gave money to them, you're not saying that's wrong.
No problem.
It's more of it's something that the church is specifically supposed to do.
Yeah.
That's what we
Yeah.
Josh?
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, I've got a lot of friends who are members of the liberal churches of Christ, and over the years, just have a chance to talk to them. Usually it comes up like, what's a good work? Do you not think it's a good work if I say, the Church of Cosby, we shouldn't do a Coke drive or a canned food drive or whatever? Don't you think that would be good? And you just have to go back to establish if it's good work, God's gonna tell us to do it. He determines what's good.
And we're not saying there's anything wrong with providing coats to needy people. But that's not the work that God gave the church to do. So if you wanted to say to a bunch of people, listen, if you got extra old coats around the house that are in reasonably usable condition, bring them to me, and I'm going to see that they get distributed to people. That's fine. We're just talking about what the church is authorized to do. There's a difference between what individuals can do and what the church is authorized to do. James?
Yeah, I think in getting to these institutions that, like food banks and stuff like that, we still got to be careful, because behind a bunch of those are religions that set up those, and then also associated with that, do teaching classes with some of the things that they receive, especially if you're giving money towards it. I think of Catholic mission, they feed people downtown. They also teach classes, and so we got to be careful.
Yeah, I think that's a good precautionary note. Be careful, because some of these organizations that are doing good work are connected to religious organizations, and they use those good works to try to promote their own religious agenda. I think a great example of that is Salvation Army. Salvation Army is doing good things, feeding hungry people. I don't deny that at all. But they're also teaching, as they feed people, they teach them false doctrine about what you must do to be saved. And so I don't give to the Salvation Army for that reason, because that would put me in fellowship with error. Ephesians 5, 11, and 12. All right? Wait.
I think what's so difficult is the fact that over the years, especially the Catholic Church, and not just the Catholic Church, but a lot of other churches, denominational churches, have basically just become more of a giving institutions to help provide physical needs for communities around them. And so people they've stopped thinking about spiritual needs, and they started thinking about the only thing that a church is supposed to do is provide for their community. And so that's kind of robbed. I think
It's called the social gospel. It's called the social gospel because it's robbed the import of the true gospel to all these social programs. I think you're exactly right. Matt.
Kind of getting back to where we started off here, one of the more modern examples, I think, where you were going with this a while ago was like Truth Magazine or Truth Bookstore. One of them, I think, one time was paying preachers' salaries. And that would be something that you'd say you would be opposed to.
Yeah,
correct?
yeah. I just don't think that there's to be any organization other than the church that's doing the work that God assigned the church to do as an overseen organization. You and I can cooperate as individual Christians. Matt, come on, let's go to Hohenwald and do some street preaching. I'll pay for the gas, you buy our lunch. We could do that as individual Christians. But once we try to organize it and appoint ourselves as the overseers and then get other people to send money that we oversee, then we've crossed the line. I think that's right. Okay, we're out of time. There's a lot involved in every one of the things that we've talked about in this course of study. There's a lot of more that can be said, and no doubt we will say more over time to come. But these are some important considerations because Jesus built a church. Jesus said, I will build my church, Matthew 16, 18. He built a church. It's identifiable. If we're going to be the church that Jesus built, then we've got to see to it that we follow the rules that He laid down. We're organized like He said it should be organized. We worship like He said we should worship. We do our work like He said it should be done. So how do you identify the church that Jesus built? By comparing a church to the pattern described in the New Testament. That's why this is also important. I hope it's been helpful. And if there are more questions, we can certainly talk more about any questions you might have on that. Here's what we hope to do starting next week. There's some books on the table in the back if you care to get one. We're going to do something different. Where the topic is major tests of our faith, things that challenge our faith. That we're going to have a series of lessons. The lessons were actually authored by Bill Hall, who many of us know. We're going to talk about major tests of our faith. How do we handle these big challenges that come along from time to time? I think it'll be a valuable discussion, but what's going to be a little bit different about it is that Josh and I are both going to be the teachers starting next Wednesday night. And so we've been referring to this as a tag team effort. We're going to tag team on this and see how that works. But I think it could be a really beneficial discussion because all of us face various tests and challenges in our personal lives as we try to serve the Lord. And we'll talk about how we address those things. Thanks, everybody.